Hey, Kayla.
What's up, Nylah? Welcome all to Preservation for the People,
A new podcast where we talk about cultural heritage, preservation, and conservation as Black people. A platform where we can discuss preservation topics pertinent to us.
We are your hosts. I am Kayla.
And I'm Nylah.
Let's get into it.
Welcome to the third episode, the season finale of Preservation for the People, brought to you by the Black Art Conservators in collaboration with Urbanist Media and supported by a racial and social justice grant from the University of California, Los Angeles.
The Black Art Conservators, which you'll hear us call BAC, is a collective of Black preservation professionals, supporting each other, building community, and seeking change in the predominantly white field of cultural heritage preservation.
We are not only your hosts, but two founding members of the Black Art Conservators.
Again, my name is Kayla Henry-Griffin. I consider myself a time-based media conservator and audiovisual archivist.
My name is Nylah Byrd, and I am an assistant conservator of objects and programs assistant at Balboa Art Conservation Center in San Diego.
Today, we will talk about the uniqueness of Black art conservation. Our guest will be self-proclaimed art rebel Leslie Guy of Leslie Guy Consultancy. And our Conservator Spotlight features BAC member Rita Cofield. What do we mean by uniqueness? Historically, the field of conservation has been predominantly white. We want to explore what it looks like when we focus on Black people and Black history.
As I mentioned, this will be the final episode of season 1 of Preservation for the People. And while we like to talk about all things under the preservation umbrella, we had to bring it home with an episode about Black conservation, being Black conservators and all. So, Kayla, can you talk about an experience working on Black cultural heritage?
Yeah, definitely. The Black Games Archive, which has been created by Treyandria Rustworm and Samantha Blackman. This includes archiving and learning more about the history of Black games and what are Black games. So they're looking into this question of what makes a video game or a game Black. Does that include having Black characters in the game? Does it have to be created by a video game developer that is Black? They're navigating that question.
Well, when I was at the African American Museum in Philadelphia for a summer internship, I got to work on a couple of William H. Johnson prints. And I bring it up because there's a William H. Johnson print reproduction in my parents' house in the kitchen. And so I've grown up looking at that piece of artwork. I didn't know anything about the artist or anything like that, but I thought the print was cool. And so getting to see those actual prints was just a connection to home for me. But like you were saying with video games, what makes it Black, right? Because not every single Black person has a William H. Johnson print in their house. But it was nice to have that experience because I think it increases that opportunity of connection. And I feel like that's what I'm getting at. It's just so random that there was this print in my house by the same artist and I was working on his work. And I feel like that the likelihood of that connection increases when Black people work on Black history.
Right. And is there such thing as Black art conservation? It's all about context. It's all about history. It's all about representation. It's all about this connection to what you're working with. And it can make a bigger difference in the cultural heritage that we are preserving.
It just reminds me of the first time we started to explore this idea. And it was in an interview with a couple of Black art conservators, including Kayla and I, that is going to be in a book, actually, called Performance, The Ethics and Politics of Conservation and Care, Volume 2, edited by Hannah Holing, Jules Pelta Feldman, and Emily Magnin, in case anyone is curious about the interview and wants to read it. But that's really the first time, at least I started thinking about Black art conservation, because they asked us in that interview, what does that mean? And I remember at the time I didn't want to define it because it was such a new concept to me that I didn't want to put out a definition that was inherently limiting because of the current context I come to conservation from. And I wanted to give Black conservation the breath to expand and be whatever it will be.
Right.
So I guess I felt it was kind of too early to put pen to paper in terms of this is how I would define it. Cause I don't know if we have to or should, or if it's worth it. And that's not like I don't know, as in we shouldn't. I mean, I literally don't know because in theory, I want all of this to just be considered conservation. So I'm always thinking about how much of this is coming out of just the exclusionary practices of excluding Black people from record keeping and history in general.
Maybe Black art conservation is coming from not being able to fit in. And maybe this is like a response to not having that space and just making our own space and calling it Black art conservation. Does it mean that like when Black art conservators are working with artwork, does that make it Black art conservation because the person who is interacting with it is Black?
Right. Like just because you're Black and do art conservation doesn't mean it's Black art conservation because we're likely working on predominantly white things, predominantly white artworks in the grand scheme of the field, at least in the United States, in terms of people who are formally trained conservators, right? This is an important distinction to make because people of all cultures and backgrounds have been preserving their history and culture throughout time immemorial. They just didn't call it conservation, right?
Right.
And so when I say that, I mean very specifically like in a conservation lab in a museum or something like that. And I keep thinking back to, I brought up the prints as an example because like while I was able to have that connection to the artwork, it was still a matte removal treatment. And that's something that any like paper conservator is used to doing. So it's not like what I did with the works was any different because I'm Black. I think it's something more in maybe the mindset and approach to a work that makes it different. Kayla and I are clearly still very undecided on this topic, and maybe our guests will be able to shed some more light and provide some more clarity. Or maybe not, and that's okay too, but we'll see.
Our guest today is Leslie Guy, who is currently head of her own business, Leslie Guy Consultancy. Leslie has held curatorial positions at the DeSalle Museum of African American History, the African American Museum in Philadelphia, as well as a conservator position at the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. Leslie received a BA from Wesley College in biological chemistry and a master's degree from Winter University of Delaware program in art conservation. Before we start with the questions, I just wanted to give Leslie a chance to tell us a bit more about herself.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to start off by saying I'm an art rebel, and we can go from there.
Great.
I love that.
So this is something that we're asking everyone that comes on, and it's just what it means to you. But we just want to start off with some sort of basic terminology. And so we're asking what you think the difference is between preservation and conservation. And this is just your opinion. It doesn't have to feel like you're defining anything for anybody at large.
To me, the definition is like splitting hairs, and it has come to mean less and less to me. I find that preservation to be a term that is more open and inclusive of other people, and I tend to use it now more.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so take us through your journey of how you got to where you are today.
You know, it was funny. I was talking with someone who's, around my age and been in the field for a while about how we got where we got. And I wish I could say it's something logical, but it's not anything logical. There is nothing logical. A lot of it had to do with luck and circumstance. And I would think the other part that I find really looking back that I would say that kind of defined the things I did or didn't do is the fact that I had 3 kids. And that made a huge difference more than anything else in terms of how I thought about my career and the things that I wasn't willing to do and the compromises I couldn't or just didn't make because of that fact. But what I can say is this, and it's more pronounced now than it was before, but the idea that you would move constantly, that you became this kind of itinerant worker, the seasonal worker that was expected to go from place to place every 12 to 18 months, every grand cycle is ridiculous. And it is not sustainable. When I started the career, there was still the idea, and there's still holdovers to this day, that if you're working in the museum field, it's a privilege. And it's something that you should enjoy and possibly not even get paid for. And I did know women who were in the field who were working for museums who weren't getting paid. They just happened to be wealthy ones, right? So I will say that part of what has informed my career in many cases has been my insistence upon doing the things that I thought were important and also having a sustainable life. Probably not the preservation answer you were looking for.
I think that was the answer that we needed. I'll say that.
Yeah, I mean, like, no expectations. We want real answers to these questions. So that was great.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay.
I do agree with you, Leslie, that it's one of those things that still happens where people do say, it's a privilege to be here. You're like, you'd have this opportunity.
That is unfortunate. I mean, in comparison to some jobs, absolutely. I have felt honored and privileged to be in contact with some of the materials and people, right? Absolutely. On the other hand, it's still a job and somebody is benefiting from the labor and you need to be compensated for it.
Exactly.
So it's not a hobby.
You were the first African-American woman to earn a master's degree from the University of Delaware program. And so given that, like, how have you seen the grad program, the field in general evolve in the past, 30 years?
I don't know. Are there 30 of us in the field today? Even?
Probably not. Probably not.
I don't even know. If the graduation rate is 1 a year, it probably isn't.
It's not even that. I know that for sure.
Okay. I can say that I'm very disappointed how, to my mind, how the field hasn't grown, evolved, and changed. I think that the field has not done a good job of advocating for people who are coming along in the sector. And I think in part because conservators kind of tend to be isolationists, right? And that doesn't help. If you're going to ask me what I think, it's because the field really hasn't taken a chance to kind of be part of the larger cultural world in a more meaningful way, because they haven't really done a good job of exercising power when they can and they should and advocating for others in the field. It turns out that the people who are coming up today are placed in positions where their work is not seen of value, where they really can't advocate for themselves, and there's no space or role seen for them in the cultural sector. And it doesn't help that I think that conservators define themselves way too narrowly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is the real substantive difference between conservation and preservation? We started off with that question. But the more niche you are, the less relevant you feel to the outside world.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And that's kind of how I feel about conservation.
Yeah, I resonate with that a lot. One thing that I've tried really hard to maintain is just like a perspective of what this means to the everyday person. And I feel like I, in so many moments outside of my job, am said everyday person and, go to museums and experience them like anybody else would. And I'm not reading all the label text either and all of this stuff. And so I just sometimes think about the way that I've seen conservators talk about conservation and all of this big potential and everything. And it seems really fun and nice when they talk about it. And it's oh, conservation has the power to save all these memories and everything, which is true to a certain extent. But it just seems to only come with this large, flowery, grandiose language. And then it seems when we have the opportunity to really do that or advocate for something like that, then it's hold on, wait, let's talk about it. Let's strategically plan. Let's this, that, and the other. And it's what if we just did more stuff? But that's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and especially how a lot of the kind of power structures that be in AIC specifically, like the American Institute of conservation don't mean a whole lot to me. Like those aren't like part of my goals. Like I could live my whole life without like being president of AIC or anything like that and like be happy. And so I'm like, if I'm like a single person and like feel this way, you know, like how many other people coming, like emerging professionals feel similarly? And what does that mean for the future of AIC?
One of the things I think about with AIC is why isn't it more closely aligned with organizations like AAM? When so many conservators actually work with inside museums, we can talk about that in general too. But this is, I think, what I think about conservation in general and whether conservators save anything. And I would argue that conservators save nothing. That the only thing that saves anything, that preserves anything, and that you can guarantee that it will, is how closely that thing, concept, idea, material aligns with power and wealth. And that's it. So if it's something that supports a narrative that people want to carry with them, then it is guaranteed that that idea, that stuff will survive. And anything else has to fight like hell.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I see it.
I wanted to ask about your experience as a curator at the DuSable Museum and as a conservator at the Penn Museum, just like how those experiences compared to one another, even though they were in different like occupational roles.
You know, I will say it was kind of my job at the Penn Museum that led me to doing more work interpreting. And that simply is because, you know, you get to a point in your career where you're in charge of larger and larger scale projects and it moves you away from the bench. And that kind of just happens, just naturally happens. It was that and being the move conservator at Penn where I transitioned to being the director of collections at the African American Museum with, you know, 2 kids in between. But this is what I kind of will say, you know, is fortunate for me, is that I was in positions and in places where you could change, grow, expand, and you weren't necessarily pigeonholed. So sometimes it's good to be in a place that's under-resourced because it gives you an opportunity to do a lot of things. It's, you know, sometimes it's not always bad. It doesn't help conservators in general. It doesn't help us in general. It doesn't help people who don't come from families with a lot of money and a lot of extra resources to define ourselves too narrowly, right? Because there are fewer opportunities out there for us if you define yourself very, very narrowly. So, you know, what I will say in the difference really is, I went into the job in Philadelphia kind of thinking a little bit more with the conservation of mindset of how to save things and turning it into a question I think that really informs how I think about things more closely is why do we save things? Not the how, not the process, but the whys and the stories connected to those whys. Far too often we're caught up in technique and process, and that is really not the most important question. The question is the why.
Yeah. It's something about the why that people, whether that be conservators or people outside of the conservation field, tend to forget, I feel like, and personally, what I've seen. So thank you for that, Leslie.
You're welcome. I mean, I think it is the why and understanding the why that allows you to connect with a wider range of people that care about the work that you do. But if you can't identify the why, then you can't connect with people and you can't ensure that the material that you're invested in will have a life going forward because it has to have another set of people to believe in the why.
Right. And it's like what you were saying earlier about how conservators have the tendency to be like isolating. That's not the point. To be frank. I guess it's also important to say, you may not know, Leslie, but I did not go to I will say an official conservation school. I went to the Moving Image Archiving and Preservation program, which is not conservation, but preservation.
You know, it's interesting to me and telling to me the fact that you had to qualify how you got to where you are. We're really amongst ourselves in this very, very tiny profession. We shouldn't be doing that.
Exactly.
We shouldn't be doing that. And I think it kind of, I know we're going to get around to it eventually, talking about conduit, the project that I worked on about community preservation and what that means and all the cultural stewards we have out there. And I'm talking about Black cultural material in particular, because writ large, this is not a body of material that museums are going to really take on in any meaningful way. And if they do, it will be a certain type of material that reflects the stories that those institutions want to tell and is interpreted in a way that the institutions want to tell those stories, irrespective of where the material came from, the other meetings it might have, the other connections it might have. And I'm saying that to say there are a body of people out there, many people out there, who for generations have been preserving in their own way. Mm-hmm. And that is a preservation practice that we need to acknowledge, because it's those cultural stewards, those heritage holders that are going to make sure that the majority of Black cultural material is saved.
Exactly.
So that's why I'm like, these titles that we use are kind of meaningless because there are people who are out there doing the work.
So dovetailing off of that, what is your unique approach to like the conservation work that you do? And do you feel like there is sort of Black conservation, like a uniqueness to the way Black people approach like conservation and preservation of history work, et cetera?
You know, that's an interesting question. I don't know if there's enough of us to talk about Black conservation. we don't have, I guess the three of us are a quorum because there's hardly any. So I don't know if I could say that, nor do I say that I'm a practicing conservator, right? Mm-hmm. I am someone who is invested in the preservation of Black culture, Black cultural heritage. I consider myself to be a cultural steward, along with a lot of other people who I know who approach this work in a different kind of a way. So if somebody who is a storyteller might approach it another way, somebody who's an artist might approach it another way, I happen to bring the lens of conservation to this work. That's all. That's it. That's all, but not exclusively. I guess the thing that I would say that distinguishes my approach from the typical conservation approach is I don't think of it as being a singular, disciplinary, solitary pursuit. I consider it to be a group and community work. That's the difference. But I can't say it's a Black conservation approach.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
Unless you guys want to vote on it. And I guess we can make it happen because we're probably a quorum.
Oh my gosh. I want to name and just highlight the fact that in your pursuit of like Black cultural preservation, you couldn't be a practicing conservator. It seems like those two things were not aligned with each other, and which is disappointing to say the least.
They're definitely not aligned, right? So imagine this, you're working in X or Y major museum someplace. So conservators, like you said at the beginning, tend to work on material that are going up for exhibition. And X or Y major cultural institution has a Black art exhibition every, 7 or 10 years? And then it's not always their stuff. And then they brought in a group of young Black curators who are desperately trying to either get collections or have collections that have been stored in the basement, housed better. They've been scrambling. Museums are so behind the 8 ball. So the thought that working in a museum as a conservator, that you can have a real impact on the preservation of Black culture by focusing on your job in that institution isn't going to happen.
Leslie, I want to know what your like big dreams for preservation are. No holds barred. If you could just have everything you wanted. What do you want to see happening? Who do you want to see doing it? Like, what's the work that we're doing?
Okay, I would say I would love for it to be that more people, anybody, so many people saw themselves as a heritage holder.
Heritage holder. It's a good term.
Because there are people out there, whether it's, the person there who has created the family photo album, which probably now is a Facebook page, right? But whether it is the person with the vinyl collection, whoever that person is, and to recognize that the people who are doing this work of preserving, of archiving, of documenting are really sharing an important part of our collective histories, and to recognize that work. The other thing that I would love to see, although, it hasn't happened, is that there were more spaces, places outside of traditional institutions where cultural material could be seen and discussed, exhibited, discussed, shared, outside of structures that exist now, things that were more community-based and organically grown and defined that way. I am, sick to death of the museum label and the language that nobody uses.
Exactly.
Right. I am sick to death of organizations that are playing music and think that, oh, this is so groundbreaking. When they have music and art, wow, at the same time.
Oh, that is funny.
I'm tired of that.
Heritage holders, I like it.
Yeah.
And people are holding in a lot of stories and lore and the beauty of like different types of histories out there. And it's getting no acknowledgement because it's not in a museum.
But, on the other hand, no, it's not in a museum. But I will say this, because I was kind of writing a report for something else recently. I was looking up museum statistics and who goes and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not a museum. And that's really a good thing, because the audience that you want to reach, they might not be those regular museum goers. So it not being in a museum doesn't delegitimize it in any way, right? And more, museums are struggling to find, well, they've been struggling for a long time about why to be relevant. And they are trying to bring people in to help them sustain their old ways. New faces, helping them sustain their old ways. I just don't think it's going to work. I think that there's an audience out there. There are people who are out there who would be thrilled to have this conversation with you. I mean, that's what I've found, is that when you start that conversation and you acknowledge the work that people are doing, you appreciate what they're doing, and you bring people with similar interests together, people appreciate that effort. And museums aren't leaders, they're followers. So whatever they're doing, but they're always following. They're never ahead.
Yeah, they are very reactive, not very proactive.
No. Which is fine. But
okay, Leslie, you've done, over the years, a plethora of like projects and initiatives. And I just wanted to know if there was one that was it can be your favorite. Not that you have to necessarily pick a favorite, but if there's one that like was very special to you for any kind of reason. I don't want it to feel like, oh, how are you making me choose between my children kind of a thing. But
oh, favorite. That is okay. I guess I'll call out a favorite moment. Years ago, when I was the director of collections in Philadelphia, one of my volunteers at the time, when she retired, was my mother. And because she was looking for something to do. And so I had my mother kind of go through and process the archive. She was going through and she was helping organize material and cataloging things. And that's when she came across a reference of her father in the archive. And that was actually one of my favorite moments, because you don't think my father was a wonderful man. He was a very religious person. He was all of these things, but I never necessarily thought of him as someone who would end up in an archive. And to see that happened, and to see that institution I was then working for was collecting those materials, and that I was responsible for those materials, it was kind of a humbling moment. But one of my favorite museum moments and working with the collection that didn't necessarily represent those were really powerful. So that we'll put up there on one of my favorite museum moments. And my mother was thrilled and over the top and was able to tell me all the stuff I didn't know, because she knew all the other people in the program, in addition to my grandfather. So, Oh, okay. There's a second one. Always kind of the private moments. And it was an exhibition, a quilt exhibition that I ended up bringing in when I was at DuSable. And I was going through the gallery, kind of checking things out. And there was a visitor there. And there was a man there who was clearly like really like overcome. And I pulled him aside and we had this talk. And he's like, thank you so much. I really appreciate this exhibition. He talked about how his mother was a wonderful seamstress, how she had done work for Ebony Fashion Fair, but his mother's work in a lot of ways wasn't recognized because his mother really couldn't read and write. So that her work was there, that it was shown that there was a reference to her in that exhibition, how much it meant to him personally. And the things that I think about, the experiences or moments that I enjoy are bringing people into a space that reflects who they are and their interests. And, we can connect with, and they're people I know, like people I grew up with, right? Regular people. Not descendants of robber barons. So those for me are always the best moments. And that is the part of the work that I think matters to me, because art is made, history is made by everyday people, right? Artists are part of communities that live places and have kids and lives, right? They're everyday people. And it always kind of trips me out where you can have a work of art that's in somebody's garage one day, and then the next day, because it is in a museum, it becomes something that nobody can see or touch. It's the same material. It's just a different venue. I was talking to a friend who was actually working on a Native American exhibition she was helping to put together. She's Navajo. And she was talking about the fact that the museum had commissioned a set of moccasins to exhibit. And somebody had brought them there from the woman who had made them into the museum, had to take them on a plane because, they were the courier. And the woman in the receiving end of the museum said to the woman who was bringing the moccasins, did you wear them? Did you try them on? And the woman was like, no, I didn't try them on. And he was like, what are you talking about? She's like, you should have worn those moccasins, right? Because the moment they went from the person who made them, who could have worn them, to the time they went into the museum, all of a sudden nobody could touch them, right? You can't touch these things. You have to put on gloves. You have to, but just a couple hours ago, this was in somebody's studio or somebody was walking on them. But then it becomes something that there's a whole set of parameters around it about how one can interact with it based upon preserving it or its potential monetary value. What are we doing when we do that kind of thing?
Like the for whom that you were talking about earlier. It's like we do all this in theory for the future generations, but it's like that can be an act of disservice to everybody that's here now.
Right. I mean, and we put future generations in quotes, because if you're preserving them for future generations, but it's an acknowledged fact that the museum going population is not representative of what the face of the country is going to look like. Who is the whom you're preserving it for? And who is that future that you have in your mind?
I mean, I think that's a perfect question to end on. Leave it open-ended.
I just want to say again, thank you, Leslie. It's been wonderful talking with you.
Thank you for inviting me. And as I say, keep up the good fight.
Thanks. We'll try. One thing that's been in the back of my mind since the interview is that she was like, oh, I'm an art rebel.
Yeah.
Man, for a lot of career things, I don't call myself something unless a lot of people do it first.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I call myself a conservator because I got my master's degree. I don't mean that. I mean, people have told me that they think I'm a leader in the field. And so only after that do I feel confident being like, yeah, I am. Because a bunch of other people said so. So clearly something's going on, right? And I want to be a rebel so bad. And it just made me when she said that, I was like, man, maybe I'm not being rebellious enough. Like, maybe I'm not making enough people angry. Not that that's my goal, but like, that's kind of part and parcel of the whole thing, right? I don't know. It's fine. I think I'm worried about like being not complacent, but you see it happen, and it's really disappointing when like Black people start off like really kind of advocating for us and inclusion into the space and everything. And the longer they're in a field, they kind of get assimilated into the system that already exists. And so that fight eventually dies down and potentially disappears until it's just like, yeah, I'm Black and I made it to the top and it's fine kind of a thing.
Yeah, definitely. And what Leslie was telling us during the interview was that like, sometimes you have to step out of the field just to see like how to advocate more for Black folks or the betterment of the field because you have a new perspective.
Yeah.
It's wild that like, as you said, like people get complacent. It's like disappointing and like so sad to see that people lose hope also. And like, I honestly understand because, you know, it's really hard to make big changes.
Oof. Because conservation can really be a bubble.
Yes, definitely.
Have you checked out the Tangible Remnants podcast? It's a podcast that talks about the existing buildings, people, policies, and projects driving change at the intersection of climate action and social equity.
At the helm of this vital conversation is Nikita Reed, an architect, sustainable preservationist, and connector of allied worlds. As a Black woman in architecture, Nikita brings a unique and essential perspective to the challenges and opportunities within the built environment. She works at the intersection of preservation, sustainability, and architecture, helping architects navigate historic approvals and encouraging preservationists to embrace sustainability. Through Tangible Remnants, she creates a space to explore how these fields overlap and how they can work together to drive lasting change.
Many people don't realize that buildings account for 40% of global CO2 emissions, and their impact on both the environment and communities is profound. The connection between sustainability and social justice is undeniable, and every renovation, restoration, and reuse project is an opportunity to reduce our carbon footprint while addressing systemic inequalities.
Through meaningful conversations, expert insights, and real solutions, Tangible Remnants highlights the critical role of the built environment in shaping a more sustainable and just future. The show continues to amplify the voices of those working to rethink how we use and value our built environment, from architects and preservationists to policymakers and community advocates.
If you're passionate about how buildings tell stories, shape communities, and drive change, now is the perfect time to tune in, engage, and be a part of the conversation. You can find Tangible Remnants wherever you get your podcasts. Since Kayla and I are only two members of BAC, we thought it would be helpful for the audience to hear from other BAC voices. So we'd like to close our show with a little segment called Conservator Spotlight.
I'm Rita Cofield. So I got my bachelor's in architecture and planning from Howard University, and I have an advanced degree in heritage conservation from USC. And I like to say that I'm qualified to investigate, designate, interpret, and manage the built environment, as well as advise on literary and historical content. I'm at the Getty Conservation Institute, which is one of the 4 programs under the J. Paul Getty umbrella. I'm an associate project specialist, and I'm currently leading the African American Historic Places LA project to identify, designate, and celebrate African American heritage within the city of Los Angeles. I really enjoy working with people that look like me because we sort of get a bad rap of not wanting or caring about our history or places that represent our history or heritage, and people having very little knowledge about our history and heritage. So it really feels good to work on this project, to spotlight that, but to also work with communities. Instead of preservationists telling communities, we think this is important because, it's the other way around. It's communities telling us, hey, we think this place is important because. I mean, at the end of the day, when we walk away from the project,
those sites are going to be in communities, so they have to care about them. I came into the project and some of my fellow colleagues and even the advisory committee, we were all like, there are Black people that cultivated space in Pacoima in San Fernando Valley. What? Of course, because the San Fernando Valley had racial restrictive covenants on it, which didn't allow people who were not white to live or buy property. So, of course, the only place that they could go was Pacoima. There was a Black equestrian community in Pacoima. Who knew? Getty is still a white space. It's still a white conservation space. And for me being the only African-American person in my department and to be working on this project, I feel really honored to be given the task or to hold the torch, so to speak, with this project. So far, we've designated Stylesville Beauty and Barbershop that's in Pacoima, California Eagle, that's along Central Avenue, has been designated, and the Tom and Ethel Bradley residence. Tom Bradley was the first African-American mayor in Los Angeles. We are in the process of designating Jules' Catch One, which was one of the first gay nightclubs open to African-Americans at the time. So it's a really important part of our history. And then lastly, we'll have St. Elmo Village, which is an arts enclave in Mid-City, Los Angeles. It's 10 bungalows that are full of artists and so really important to the Black arts movement in Los Angeles during the 60s and 70s when it was founded. What's unique about the Black space is the Black culture is unique. Everything sort of revolves and came out of the Black culture. I mean, all of these spaces that people are quote unquote giving Black folks credit for now, like we helped to create those spaces. And it's like we helped to start those spaces. So that's when you talk about uniqueness, I think also we are some of the first to do certain things. I would like us to get to a place where we are not the first, where it's just based upon, our character and based upon our talent, but we are unique in the fact that without African Americans, you would not have the United States, you would not have America. You would not have a lot of the creations from technology to art to sports. You would not have all of those wonderful things that we get to enjoy in the United States as America, or even globally, if it were not for, sadly, the labor of Black folks in this country.
Thanks for joining us on Preservation for the People, brought to you by Black art conservators and supported by a racial and social justice grant from the University of California, Los Angeles.
Many thanks to everyone who made this episode possible. The UCLA Coates Institute of Archaeology and the UCLA Getty Interdepartmental Program in Conservation of Cultural Heritage. Andrew Calloway, Decca Hussein Wetzel, and Vanessa Quirk of Urbanist Media. If you or your organization are interested in making a podcast, then reach out to them at urbanistmedia.org. We're here.
Get used to it. And remember, preservation is for the people.